Yeah, are we good?
Yeah, I just pressed the start button. The fire it up button. Unlive.
Live, and then we were unlive, and now we're relive.
All right, ready for the intro?
Yep.
What's up, everybody? My name is Indy, and the gentleman all the way over there on the right, that is Mr. J. Powell from Powell Group Consulting, and we have Ben Hoyt in the middle, our special guest, and this is Indie Game Business. Welcome.
Yeah, and for those of you who watch Tiger King, you may recognize Ben. He's the one that was interviewed quite frequently with no shirt on. He has got more teeth now, but
I'm keeping my tats under this Top Gun t-shirt. So
we were just discussing that before we went live. No, Ben and I met. We were trying to figure out how far back, but it was like 2001. And back when GDC was in San Jose, we met, and we've stayed in touch. We're still, friends to this day. He lives out in Apocalypse Central in LA. So,
which is what we call it, even when there isn't a coronavirus outbreak. We just call it Apocalypse.
Out of sheer curiosity, what is traffic like in LA right now?
I wouldn't know because I don't go out. But the photos I've seen are pretty stunning, and I have heard anecdotally from people who are like, "Oh yeah, the drives that they make now and the time they make them are completely unheard of."
It's like I can get around the block in less than an hour and a half now. That's
Yeah.
And the skies are blue and clear.
Oh, stunning! It's beautiful.
Indy, can we get, we still got LinkedIn issues. Now somebody says they can't hear us either, but I know we can't see us. Did we do that RMTP thing again?
It's just set up to standard be that way. So,
all right. Well, we still don't know what's going on with LinkedIn. We want to talk about how things are changing for better, for worse, with all of the social distancing, and everybody's working from home now. And where do we want to start? And I want your input on this too, Indy. If we want to start there.
Okay, well, I can start. Well, I'll tell you what happened, because there's 5 people that live with us, right? We got my wife, we got my daughter, my granddaughter, and my wife's dad. And the girls had a spa day the other day, and apparently I got my toes and my fingernails painted pink. So that's a little bit different.
So we want things that have changed, Indy.
We do
like on a normal Saturday
there's
night.
Weird shit that happens at our house anyway, so.
But on the streaming side, are you seeing like an influx, more people watching, more people streaming?
I think there's more people streaming and more people watching. For me personally, I haven't really been streaming that much, but I think I've seen for other streams, they are getting a massive increase in viewers overall on Twitch. Because, everyone's from home, so everyone's just, I wonder if that, changes because you can go in your stats and see, X amount of people watch from the web, X amount of people watch from their PC, X amount of people watch from their mobile devices. I wonder if that has increased the amount of people watching from consoles or people watching from their PC as opposed to people watching from their iPads or Android devices. That would be an interesting thing to have a look at.
I don't know how many people. I never pay attention to that anyway. So I would assume you got more people watching from PC. I don't know. Idea.
That'd be something interesting to look into.
I would hypothesize that you're going to see a bigger jump not on the consoles, because with everybody home now, this is my theory about this, and this is completely unsupported by any actual data. Let's just get that out there first. But
that sounds like 80% of Facebook right now.
Yeah. So I'm in the majority.
Right.
No. So I think my point is that with so many new people online at home, stuck at home, that a lot of what I'm hoping will happen is people who are not traditionally gamers and not traditionally into online games or Twitch streaming or whatever the activity is, are going to find themselves with so little else to do that they're going to become into that. And so that we aren't just seeing a bunch of gamers run home and play games and get online, but actually, in addition into that a bunch of new people who otherwise would have been out going to sporting events, playing sports, doing other types of activities, also getting into these things because they're one of the few activities that's available. And that means, growing the pool overall of these people, which I think would mean probably you're going to see a bigger spike on non-consoles because the console people are more likely to already be tuning in. And then hopefully it'll also mean a growth of the overall pie. Once this is all passed, you're going to get some percentage of those people are going to go, oh, wait a minute, these video games and things are actually really cool. I'm going to stick with them now that I don't have to, and that will be a boon for our industry in the long run.
I think so too. One thing I saw was that they did it was a week or so ago, like just some NASCAR drivers did like a virtual event, and it was so popular that now NASCAR is doing a whole season, but it's not. It's like with a bunch of NASCAR drivers from all different sections of NASCAR, and they have like the official NASCAR announcers, and I think that's really cool.
They had over 900,000 viewers on FS1. It wasn't even like on regular Fox. It was on FS1. And I sat down and watched it. I mean, it's in some way, granted, I am nothing normal. I grew up in North Carolina. I mean, Richard Petty's shop was 20 minutes from my house. So NASCAR is something that I've been following my entire life. But that sport got to the point where you see empty stands everywhere. They did all this growth, and there's a ton of different theories on why fans have dropped, but you don't see nearly as many people going to the events anymore. And having something like this where you had not only some of the current drivers, but you had drivers in other sections of NASCAR, because there's like all the stuff you see local, and then you go to trucks, and then you go to
and it's all different drivers. I thought that was cool.
But then you have people like Bobby Labonte. Bobby Labonte's been retired for a decade. And he jumped in there and started doing it. And in many ways, it's one of the most pure versions of who's a better driver, because everybody's running the exact same car. It doesn't matter who has this engine set up, or they had their camber or their tire pressure or whatever. Everybody's running the same damn car. So,
which is ironic, really, because that's supposed to be the way the stock car racing is anyway, right?
Yeah, but you got to remember, Richard Petty once said there is absolutely nothing stock about a stock car. So, but they used to run the IROC series, where they basically put everybody in a Camaro, and they would bring people in from F1 and Indy cars and all these other racing, and that was like the international. IROC was International Race of Champions, and so that's what they tried to do there. But now you've got, legitimately everybody's running the same thing. I was watching one of the drivers who runs the big league. They changed sponsors now so much I can't remember what they're called, but the highest league, and he's had an explosion on Twitch because, like me, I realized that, okay, wait, I'm watching this on Fox, but I'm not getting actually the good audio that I would be getting if I was on Twitch. And so I switched it over to Twitch to watch his feed. And someone asked him, they said, why are the sim racers so much better than the real racers if this is a simulation? And he said, when I'm driving the car on a track, he said, I don't listen. I listen for little stuff, but you feel it, so if my right rear is going low, I can feel it. And he said, when you're doing the sim, you don't have that, and everything is visual. And he said, so the people that have been playing the sim for a long time, which they have, it's second nature. But so many people, it became the biggest esports event as far as viewership on TV, I think, ever. Wow. And now they're running a whole series of it. So there are absolutely opportunities coming out of this, but at the same time, you got companies. I talked to a team this morning, and they had a whole lineup of contract work from a major U.S. media company. And that company just said, look, we don't know when things are coming out. We're going to put everything on hold. And instead of saying, hey, here's the money to get to your next milestone, they were like, we're just not paying you anything until, whatever. And now that is absolutely killing some of these studios.
Yeah. I mean, I think that unfortunately that's just a taste of what's happening. I mean, you want to be in the restaurant business right now. You know what I mean? It's happening in industries all over the country. You know, it's yeah. I don't even want to think about. I mean, you know, I wrapped a contract a couple of weeks ago, like a week before things started to get real ugly, and I've just been relieved that it looks like some people are still moving forward and hiring and doing that kind of thing, because I assumed, at least at the time, that like everything was just going to get completely shut down. And for our industry, that doesn't seem to have been the case. There are definitely lots of activity still happening, but I'm sure there's some people who are getting screwed by this, you know?
They are. And, you know, that's one of the things that's ironic right now. It's like my wife's getting laid off in 3 days. She knows.
Yeah.
They already told them. It's like, but you know, the company is going to keep them on insurance through 2 months to hope they can, you know, get back and be going full time again at that point in time. But it's like our work over here at the Powell Group has taken off. I've been on basically the phone all morning this morning, and it's been like that for the last 2 days, you know. And so that's not only because you brought up the digital conference thing before we went live. Yeah, part of that is the digital conference, because we've been doing these things for a year now, and you know, we've been standing there going, hey, this is something cool, this is something new, saves you money, it's really good, and everybody's been like, oh, whatever, you know, blah blah blah, digital conference. And now we're having 2 and 3 calls a week, you know, with companies going, can you do one of these for us? And it's not just the game industry. You know, our partner over at Meet the Match, you know, he's having 8-10 phone calls a day with all kinds of different industry events. But
which I think the question that I think is really the one that I'm interested in to find out the answer to, and it's probably true for.
We lost all your audio there. Are you still there? Did we lose? Yep.
I see him, but I don't hear him.
Yeah, you're not talking anymore, Ben.
There's
all right. He's gonna be back in just a second.
There's a question in here you can answer, Jay.
All right.
From
are we back?
We're back. We got to get your camera, though.
We're done without you, Ben. We have a different guest now. So,
all right, there we go. Sorry.
Hold on.
You know, I try to be real responsible and have my settings on my iPhone kick in and tell me, you know, so many minutes on social networking today, you got to stop. But it occasionally will completely interrupt the conference
call. The dog's getting into something in the background, but there's a question there.
So what's the question we got? Indy left. Everybody's just going crazy. All right. So
anyway, I was just saying, I think the thing that's going to be interesting is whether you're like the spike you're seeing in interest in online conferences and stuff persists beyond the immediate, you know, coronavirus sort of lockdown phase. And if people come out of this and go, oh, you know what, that was effective and cost effective and satisfactory, and we're going to go ahead and keep doing those. Or if people go, okay, great, now we can get back to going to San Francisco and meeting up at GDC or whatever. You know what I mean?
I think based on just looking over the 4 events that we've had in the last year, each one has grown. Mm-hmm. You see people. So the different thing is, everybody knows GDC is in March, Gamescom in August, and they plan for them. The difference with the digital conference is we can do them more often. We can do one every month if we wanted to, which we typically don't do. But you get companies who go to one and they don't necessarily need to go to the next one, but then they'll go to the one following. But we have seen an uptick in attendance at every single one of them, because people realize after they do it that it's not a gimmick. It does work. It's effective. And in many ways, it's better. And so then, of course, we saw like a hockey puck we had over 700 participants in the one last week. Usually it's around, 100 or so. but people understand it's a matter of getting them to see the value in it, and that's what I've been saying for a year. It's once you attend one and you see how much more effective it is, then you're like, oh wait, this is how I want to do it from here on out.
I'm curious, and maybe you can answer this question for me if you don't mind. But it's obviously I haven't attended one yet, and
that's because you suck.
I know, but at least I'm honest about it. I wear it on my sleeve. So I'll give you an opportunity to maybe plug them a little bit by answering this question on for me, because when I think of going to a conference like GDC or something, I think of, what are the activities that happen there that are of value to people? And I think that the two big and obvious ones are attending sessions and networking, like general networking, reconnecting with people meeting new people you haven't met before. And then depending upon who you are and what your priorities are, there's also almost certainly either a deal-making opportunity there where people are trying to have business meetings. And then there's also a hiring element, right, where people are trying to meet employers and get jobs and that kind of thing. When I think about GDC, for me, and this is obviously going to vary depending upon who you're talking to, but for me, most of the time, the value of GDC is on the networking side first and foremost, which is, something that happens a lot in the evening after the show, or, either at parties or at the lobbies of the hotels with the big bars where you're reconnecting with friends and then meeting their friends and then going out and having a good time and building relationships that you can then carry forward. And that to me feels like one of the things that would be most difficult to replicate in a digital environment. Whereas, if I needed to have a meeting or watch a presentation, I can imagine how that would make more sense in a digital environment. And I'm just curious if I'm missing something, or if you feel like, what do you feel is the sort of like, if you were to give your conference a score between 1 and 10, or let's not say any the idea of an online conference, a score between 1 and 10 in each of those categories, how would you rate it?
So, all right, here's one fundamental difference. So what you just described is you're going to a show for the social aspects.
Generally, yeah.
And me, the very same way. I haven't attended a lecture at GDC in probably a decade.
Yeah.
And I know that the majority of the business that is happening over in the JW or the Death Star bar or somewhere like that, not necessarily on the floor. So there are ways that we have addressed that, but it's not going to be the same. That's just the reality of social distancing now. What we've done is we put a special set of channels on our Discord server, and we've got over 900 companies on a Discord server now. But if you attend one of the events, you get access to the virtual event channels where you can do that. You can do the random networking and talk to people and that sort of stuff. It's not going to replace going to a conference and hanging out for an hour or 2 or 5 in the bar at whichever hotel is. That's just the reality of it. The difference that we try to make is I absolutely loathe companies that hide knowledge behind a paywall. It's not going to happen to me. We're adding lectures to our next one, but it's not going to be a situation where, like the Pocket Gamer conference coming up. They have a digital conference coming up. Amazingly, how everybody wants to do a digital conference now. They've got one coming up, and you can get a $50 ticket if you are an indie developer with less than 10 people. If you are another developer or a publisher, there's like a $150 ticket. If you're not a developer or a publisher, it's a $250 ticket. And you're not going to be able to see the lecture content unless you buy a ticket. To me, that's just bullshit. That's the reason we started doing this show, frankly, 2 years ago, is because I wanted to be able to take the knowledge that people like you and I and Dan have, but we somehow take it for granted because you're just like, oh, well, of course you know how to qualify a publisher. That's just, everybody knows that. But no, they don't know that. And I wanted to take these fundamental things about business in the industry and make it accessible so people can learn it without, spending 10 grand to fly to San Francisco for a week. That is what we try to facilitate. We're there to educate, and we're there to provide opportunities for developers to meet publishers.
Do you monetize at all?
We do, but it's not a profitable venture by any means. It's we started on the first one, we gave away a lot of tickets. And what we found was the people that didn't pay for a ticket didn't get involved. They didn't see the value in it. They weren't invested personally in it. So the people that did pay, the publishers that come in and they look at it, and there's a list of 50 developers, and maybe 20 of them have a profile filled out, and that's just not good for anybody. So we do charge, but it's not something that I'm going to say remotely actually makes money. That's just what it is. But people talk about, oh, you don't get the random encounters with publishers. No, you don't. But you also have a direct, easy to sort, easy to read listing of every publisher who is going to be in attendance and exactly what they're looking for. So you don't have to rely on those chance meetings. And you can still, you can still do it on Discord. We have a lot of publishers on our Discord. But for what you and I look at in our conference experience, it's quite frankly not going to replace it. I'm not going to sit here and say it is, because that's a whole different world. That's a different reasoning. Our event is built to share knowledge and to provide targeted opportunities for companies to show what they're doing.
Do you guys try to host any kind of online happy hour? Everybody's encouraged to be on at this time and come to this room and have a drink in hand and spin off into little subgroups with whoever they meet or want and just kind of chat and bullshit.
So Liam over at Liam has a gigantic Trello board, basically, of game development information. He started doing something like this, and it's something that feasibly, yes, we could do on our Discord, but I'll tell you the God's honest truth is I'm not organized enough to be able to do it. If someone else came in and said, yes, because there's the group out of the UK that does the Indie Dev Hour on Twitter. If someone were to come in and do it, then yes, I'm all for it. Knock yourself out. I'm just doing good, especially these days, to get work done, educate an 8-year-old and manage to eat lunch, much less, how can I organize social events? But Discord gives you that possibility of doing that.
Yeah. I could see that being successful, or at least, I could see people engaging in it,
So yeah, Ben, you're on the Discord now. So if you want to organize that, I'll do it. Get going on this.
How was this conference? Because you just wrapped it up last week, right?
Yeah, I love this. It's we have Ben on the show, and he's the one.
Yeah, he interviews you.
No, I'm being interviewed. Yeah, we did. It was really, really good. It was. Yeah. There were downsides of it because of the way it came about. We were planning to do the show, the next event, next Thursday and Friday. But when GDC started imploding, we moved it up and merged it with Meet to Match's on-site event because they power our event as well. So on the upside, we had 700 people that were interested in going. On the downside, a lot of them, I want to say a lot, there were a annoying number of them who, for whatever reason, stopped checking emails or didn't look at the updates. But when everything switched from offline to online, it's I would literally send people meeting invites and it says location Skype with my Skype name. And I would get a response back. It's like, well, as you know, the coronavirus is in San Francisco, and so we're not going to be traveling to the show. But can we do a meeting on Skype? Like, yes, that's exactly what I just fucking sent you. It's like, what part of this didn't you get? And so we had a lot of people, myself included. I think I ended up with 25 meetings and 17 meetings pending, which meant the person on the other side of it neither accepted nor declined the meeting, aka they didn't even look, you know. So that was one of the headaches of the whole thing. But it was more a factor of, we basically took people who were expecting an on-site event, and despite how many times we emailed them and notified them that everything was going online and they didn't have to do anything different, it was just going to be online. People didn't read the damn emails, basically.
That makes sense. I mean, I suppose it's like people going to GDC for the first time. They miss a lot of things. They don't know what they're doing. You know, it's just the online version of that.
It is. I mean, because we were talking on the last show about how overwhelming these shows can be. If you've never been to one. And that's a reality of all of them. It's just like, you take a look at it and it's like, okay, wait, where do we even start? All right, so Andy, you said we had a question.
Yeah, it was from Kick Alley on Twitch. What's the feeling here?
Hey.
What's the feeling here about launching and promoting an open beta of a new mobile health app that can actually help users stay healthy because it uses mixed reality, where the player kicks a soccer ball on their mobile screen using their own foot? No monetization, so it's about helping our fellow man, not money right now.
So I know exactly what you're talking about. The problem you're going to face is getting people to download it, because so many other people are doing that right now. It would become you need to use it as a vehicle for marketing. It's like, I want to help people too. I am all about it. Let's help where we can. But at the same time, we have to realize that you got to have something going on otherwise too. So if you take the app and you put it out there for free and you market it as, because that's a good angle. It's, look, we know you don't have room. You know, basically, I mean, look, Ben's in a place in LA, and my living room is probably bigger than his whole apartment. But you've got to be able to exercise. You've got to be able to stay healthy. I mean, I need to do that on a daily basis here in my office, even without a killer virus running around. But make sure you have something in there that's going to, at least point people to what you're doing in terms of other games, or, promote the company in general. The good news is, yes, you can absolutely get out there and help people right now. But the bad news is there's a ton of other people trying to do the very same thing. And
I'm struggling to really envision this particular app from like a user experience perspective. If the question is really specifically about, do I think this app is one worth creating? I would say that personally,
it's already created.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Maybe people are using it. I'm having a hard time envisioning it and understanding how it would be something someone would engage with for very long. And I think that's, my chief complaint about most augmented reality apps out there is that they're gimmicky. And so, you might be interested by it for a few minutes, but if you're not going to engage with it for much longer, because it's requires you to hold your phone up in front of yourself, I don't know how much I would expect people to use it.
So, I mean, I know the thing she just mentioned, it's already up on Apple and Google. So it's already been, you don't have to put any development resources into it, so to speak, because it's already there. Mm-hmm. But, I agree. Making it, God, and I hate using this word, but, if you gamify it and you add objectives and things to do, I mean, let's face it, a lot of these things, exist and continue to persist due to the fact that there's shit to collect. And so Pokemon Go is the extreme example of that, but that's also a billion-dollar franchise on top of it. But if you give the user a reason to come back the next day, that's where it will benefit. I mean, that's the reality of this and everything else, though. It's a matter of creating that that urgency to check in every day, and whether you do that through challenges or quests or objectives or collectibles or whatever it is, and this goes for not only the soccer game, but any kind of, like you said, AR game. A lot of them come off as gimmicky, but if you don't have engaging content, you can't expect the same gameplay mechanic over and over and over to continue to attract people, because people don't have that kind of attention span. They play it and they're like, oh, this is cool, let's go play it again, let's go play something else, or let's do something else. But you've got to have those mechanisms in there that's going to force them to come back every day. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, you're talking about gamification strategies, right? Things like achievements and scores and leaderboards, and a lot of things that have become fairly standard tools for scratching these itches for people in terms of motivations, which I agree do tend to help with getting people to engage and return to some sort of an experience. But it's the core mechanic of this that I am unsold on. And admittedly, I haven't. It sounds like there's a specific app that you're talking about, and I simply may be unfamiliar with it, and therefore not understanding it properly. But my experience would be, as a soccer player, AR soccer of any form sounds really, really unsatisfying, because I don't believe that a modern AR app is going to have enough sophistication to be able to really satisfyingly recreate the experience of kicking a soccer ball. And B, there are certain physical elements of kicking a soccer ball that, if you don't have those because you're kicking a imaginary soccer ball, it's not really there, it's going to be really hard to make satisfying for anyone who actually plays soccer. But maybe that's not the audience. Maybe you're just, I don't know, maybe you're trying to give something to people who aren't soccer players or something.
So core game loop aside, helping people and providing an outlet right now is good.
Sure.
You just have to make sure that either, like Ben says, you're going to consistently engage them day in and day out. And maybe it's not, I mean, it could very well be that there's not really soccer players themselves aren't going to see a benefit from it, but other people might. And that's something that we don't know. That's just depends. That comes down to your daily and weekly and monthly retention rates. But my point is, you don't rely on we're helping people to stay active in their home as your sole marketing hook. There's got to be something more in there, because so many other companies are doing that right now. All right. So anyway, what was next? We had this list of things that we wanted to talk about, and now I forgot what they were. All right. Look at from your side, Ben. You work with a development studio. How have things changed in the last 2 weeks for you all? What's better? What's worse? What have y'all done to adapt?
Well, to be fair, like I said earlier, I wrapped a contract on 4th or something like that of March, and so I have not been working with the studio during this period of time. So I don't have a specific, like, oh, this is what I've noticed has changed a lot, other than that I've seen, to my pleasant surprise, work is continuing. There's relatively little in terms of things getting shut down and people getting laid off for our industry. I mean, that has happened, I'm sure, but I haven't heard about that happening on a widespread basis. And I know teams are trying to move to this sort of distributed development, remote development type of work environment, and there are certain things that brings with it in terms of not only the technology that's involved, but also I think how you try to communicate and coordinate and operate in a distributed digital environment. And a lot of it has to do with video conference calls.
So in terms of, I mean, because that's another good point. You said you wrapped a contract. I didn't know you meant the contract I was thinking of. So what are you doing on your side as now like a freelance producer? What are you doing to?
I had been talking to because the way as a freelance producer, I have like a vendor type of relationship a lot of the time with companies that will hire me either for a specific period of time or for a specific project to manage and oversee. I've been talking to companies, potential client companies before the coronavirus thing got out of hand. It has definitely created enough chaos that it has slowed down those conversations, and in terms of people saying like, hey, I'm working on figuring out how to get my entire team working remotely and shutting down my office and, still trying to close deals and stuff. So those conversations have slowed down, but the good news is that they're continuing to happen. And there do seem to be quite a few companies that are, if not continuing as they had planned, even ramping up as a result of this, the crazy things that are going on in the world right now.
And I think we're going to see a lot more ramping up. I mean, yeah. And I've told a couple of people, and I don't know if we've been live since I heard this, but I talked to a publisher earlier this week, and they've seen a 400% increase in sales, and they haven't done anything different. No change to marketing at all.
Yeah. Well, just think about it. Think about it. Like, it's the same version of what you're going to see on any kind of video streaming platform, like a Netflix or something like that, right? Like, you're stuck at home. More people are at home with less to do, and video games are one of the primary diversions and distractions that people will turn to when stuck at home. And that's just a classic increase in demand, right? Like, demand goes up, and you need to increase supply in order to meet it. And I think you're going to see that is like, hey, a bunch of the games that people play are really only fun once, and once you played them, it's time to go find another game, and then that's more people needing to go buy and download more games,
Well, and with more revenue coming in, we're seeing publishers who had previously said, okay, look, we're full for the year. We're not looking for anything until next year. Now going, well, maybe we can put another game out in Q3, Q4.
Yeah.
Let's see what's out there. But it sounds to me like it's even a better opportunity for folks like you and I who have done remote work before, and this isn't like my daily life hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still get up in the morning, eat breakfast, and do that commute of about 10 yards to the office. Mm-hmm. The difference is I don't have to take my son to school anymore, and it's in return I have to educate him somewhere along the line. And I will say, if there are any end of year exams focused around building 90s in Fortnite and accuracy along those lines, he's going to do very well. But this has created an opportunity for folks like you, freelance producers. When those teams come to you and they're like, we don't know how to get our team working online remotely well, that's where folks like you and I can go, oh, we can help you do that. We've been doing that for years. It's like everything else. There's going to be changes. But
I mean, I think that in my experience, there's nothing about game development that requires that it happen co-located, right? Like, you absolutely, and there's plenty of examples of games that have been developed this way, that are developed, either partially or entirely distributed. As a producer, I always prefer to have my team co-located, or at least portions of the team, because I think that there are real valuable intangibles that come out of harder to replicate in a distributed environment. I do think that you can. Well, so the big thing you get in game development, right? Like, if you want specifics, but like the big thing that you get when you have a team in the same place is the sort of random and emergent solutions that can happen in real time, that don't happen anywhere near as quickly and maybe missed entirely when people aren't sitting in the same room with each other. And a lot of it has to do with, that point where one person finds something, a bug or whatever it is that's confusing or frustrating or whatever, and in the office you would just turn to the guy next to you and be like, hey, what the fuck is, hey, you over here, what do you, like, what do you think of this asset? Do you think this looks good, right? And people have this sort of like creative energy that comes about, whereas when you're distributed, that's harder unless everybody's like logged into the same video chat all day long, right? Which brings its own challenges and downsides to it.
So here's my counter argument. How much of that time is recovered because you're not sitting in stupid fucking meetings all the time?
Well, and I wouldn't presume to be able to tell you definitively, and it probably depends a lot on exactly how you're doing things, not to mention the fact that you get back, in some cases, 1 to 2 hours worth of commuting time out of your day that you can potentially be putting all or most of into actually being productive at the office. So it's hard to quantify for sure. But one of the things that as a producer I've learned about communication, and this gets exacerbated the further people are away from each other geographically, because time zone issues begin to become a problem, is turnaround time on a communication. When I'm working with a team that's in, say, China or Eastern Europe or something like that, where there's almost no overlap between my time in the office and their workday, you can get, it becomes really hard to get a question answered, because it's like throwing something over the fence and then waiting for someone in another place to answer, and then that comes back to you and you effectively get it the next day, get your answer that you're looking for. And so even simple pieces of conversation dramatically slow down. You throw in language barriers, which tend to accompany those kinds of geographical differences, and you may lose several days because it turns out the person didn't understand the question correctly when you asked it. And so it's like, you ask a question, they get it there next day, they misunderstand it, they send you the wrong answer, you realize they sent you the wrong answer, you clarify it back to them. It's like fucking 3 days later, right? And I'll give you one production tip that I learned the hard way for
it's like it's funny because it's true.
It sounds funny, but it is not funny when you're dealing with it in the moment, believe me. And you're trying to hit deadlines and get things done, and you realize that your partners in China misunderstood your question yesterday, and you have to clarify it today, and your best chance of getting a decent answer is going to come tomorrow.
What do you mean you added multiplayer?
So I'll tell you one thing that, one solution that I implemented on a project last year for that exact issue, which is going to also make you laugh, but you'll realize the importance of it. We were working on a project with a Chinese company, and the Chinese company had literally 0 people at it who spoke any English. And obviously, my Chinese is also totally 0. So the good news was I had some junior production people at my company who were Chinese or Chinese American, and were able to translate. But these same problems existed, and they're exacerbated by the fact that I was now communicating through translators to my developer, right? Like I would have, they might have a question that they would send over in Chinese, and I would need to figure out what they were asking, respond to it in English, and get that information back to them in Chinese in a way that was effective. And the only people handling that communication, the intermediaries, were junior, like associate producer level type of professionals. And so what I got in the habit of doing was I would get into the office first thing in the morning, and I would have an email from China that would have the latest round of questions that needed to be answered in Chinese. Because I was sufficiently embedded in the project, I was usually able, if I just had that translated by machine translation, Outlook's built-in automated translation system, I could usually get that into English in a form that I could understand what they were asking. And then because they were offline by that point, I knew I had the rest of my work data. And so I would figure out the answers to the questions they were asking over the course of my workday in English. And then what I realized, what I did at first was I would send that English response to one of my Chinese associate producers. They would translate it, and then they would send it to China. And what I was finding was that what was coming back the next day from China was not right. Usually because my own teammate, in the process of translating into Chinese, had translated it in such a way that it lost some of its meaning to the audience that I was trying to get. So the change that I made was I broke that up, and I would send it to my associate producer, one of my two associate producers. I would have them translate it into Chinese. Blind. The other person was blind to what was in the English. I didn't copy it to my other Chinese speaker.
Okay.
And then
I thought for a second you meant they were actually blind.
No,
I'm like, yes,
they're not literally blind. They couldn't see what I had sent to, say, let's call them associate producer A. Associate producer A translated it into Chinese and then sent it to associate producer B, who then translated it out of Chinese and sent back to me in English what they thought the associate producer A. That allowed me to vet the translation of associate producer A through a different Chinese speaker and confirm that the message had gotten through clearly. If so, then I had associate producer A go ahead and send the email to our partners in China. If not, it gave me the opportunity to correct the translation here before the end of the day and clarify it before it went to China. So that extra step of an internal, like a blind internal audience that was getting that content before it went out of the house, allowed me to eliminate a lot of these really frustrating experiences where it would turn out we'd put in all this effort and then we got back garbage the next day because the translation had been bad or because there had been a misunderstanding. Sometimes does that make it?
Wow,
that sounds like a lot.
It was absolutely.
You need a native English speaker and a native Chinese speaker to translate in and out.
Native Chinese speakers who also spoke English to do this effect.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if that situation starts raising its head again, what would you do to resolve it?
I mean, there are a couple of things you can do that would help. The first is if anyone at the Chinese company spoke English, right? Like even just one person at that company who had a strong grasp of English would have made a big difference, because then my ability to communicate with them directly would have improved dramatically, right? As it was, you think that sounds bad, you should have seen what conference calls were like. Because we would get into cases where we felt like we needed to resolve something that was complicated or needed to be resolved quickly and in real time. And I would get on a call, a question would be asked, I would answer it to my associate producer in Chinese, and then I would sit for like 15 minutes while they went back and forth in Chinese, and I had no idea what anybody was saying. I was like, that's definitely a lot more conversation than I said, you know?
I asked how you were doing. I
responded in 30 seconds, and I've been sitting here for 15 minutes while they're trying to clarify what this is, and I have no idea whether or not the information that's going back and forth is good or clear or what. So simply having one English speaker on the other end of that line would have been the single most valuable thing that could have happened. Otherwise, I think you do have to kind of do it like that. And then where things started to get better for me was when we more senior, in the absence of that, we hired a more senior producer on my side, more like a mid to senior level producer who was reporting to me, who also spoke Chinese. And I was able to just delegate to her, go have that conference call, because I can trust that you're going to be able to represent what needs to. I'm adding any value to it. Like I would be on a line for 2 hours starting at 7 p.m. because that's 7 a.m. or something like that, and I would be on the line at home for 2 hours and probably have a grand total of 15 minutes of time that I understood what was being said in the conversation. It was one of the most painful experiences as a producer I've ever had.
And you can't trust how Skype has the translator, because already the closed captioning on that kind of stuff is terrible anyways.
But the other thing is that Chinese is it's a symbolic language, right? And so there's nuance in the way that things are written and how they get translated, that particularly when you're talking about things that are technical or that are specific to to a video game that might be, effectively game specific vocabulary or terminology, that automated translation is going to struggle with. Like the way I was able to read the stuff that was machine translated that was coming into me was because I started to understand how the machine translation would translate certain game terms into words that definitely weren't what they were. At least I understood that's what they meant to the machine. Does that make any sense?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, so one of the lessons learned, and I don't know if you went out and sought this third-party development studio, or if it's one of those like we frequently get where you're brought in. This is the joy of those of us who freelance. It's like you're brought in to firefight. It's like, hey, this project is not going well. You fix it.
Yeah.
But that is one of the things that you absolutely have to have when you're doing remote work, overseas contract work. And we've been doing overseas contract work for 20 years. And so you have to make sure that there's somebody that speaks the same language, whether or not you speak Chinese. If you speak Chinese, then that's fine. You speak English, you speak Chinese, problem solved. But you've got to make sure there's somebody on the other side who does it as well. And a lot of times that gets brought out in the proposal stage. If you're the publisher and you put the RFP out, if the RFP comes back in English or horrible English or not in English at all, you have an understanding of how the discussions are going to go from here on out. But it's like once you're thrown into that, it's like
it's funny because I've had this experience. I've managed teams in India, and I've worked with remote teams in places like London and even Eastern Europe, and the challenges have been different in each case. The language aspect is critical, but not sufficient, right? Like the experience of working with an Indian developer for me was less painful than it was working with in that Chinese example, but still brought with it its own set of challenges. Once you get past the language barrier, there were still other cultural challenges, and I found in working with the Indian developers that you still couldn't make the same kinds of assumptions about what needed to happen that I might have been able to with a domestic developer. And when I worked with this team in London, I actually found it was almost better in some ways than working with it, at least in some respects, that you got real efficiencies because there was so much clarity and understanding, and there was maybe 2 hours of overlap in the morning when I would get into the office when they would still be there, where we had enough shared understanding that I could get a brain dump from them in terms of what had happened in their day at the end of their day. And then I could say, great, I'll take this document and I'll run with it. And then I could spend my day working on it. It's like a Google Doc or something like that. And by the end of the day, shoot off a quick summary of where I'd left things. I go home, and then they would arrive at my midnight or whatever, pick it up and carry it forward. And by the time I got back into the office in the morning, there'd been effectively a whole nother day's worth of work and progress made. And you can get to the point where you have this sort of like continuous or virtually continuous work happening on something, which is the theoretical advantage of that kind of distributed approach, but it all comes down to the effectiveness of your communication. If your people are tightly in sync with each other and able to hand things off seamlessly, it's like, great, now we're working around the clock. But if not, then it can be the opposite, and it can be like, oh, it takes 2 days to get an answer to a question.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of outsourced studios, especially in India and China as well, who pitch it as this is a benefit. It's like you're going to have a 24-hour development cycle, because exactly what you just said. But the reality is, if you don't have the communication to facilitate that, it's not going to be.
Yeah, and the time zones become a major factor in both directions, because if the communication is there, you can be real efficient in an hour or two and then take advantage of that. But if not, then the time zones are working actively against you because it's so hard to get clarity on things.
Unless you start working their hours, which is which I mean, and I know folks that do that. They've worked remote for so long, and with a U.S. company or with a European company or However, that they literally just start, their day revolves around the same time that, their clients does.
If you have a family situation that can accommodate that, by all means. I don't know if that's as practical. The more home life responsibilities people tend to get.
Yeah, and you have a little one, so you're.
I do.
Yeah, you're for a while anyway. I don't know if you're just sleeping through the night yet, but mine's 8 and he doesn't do it. So the it's you're either going to be up anyway, or you really want that sleep when you can get that sleep. This has been awesome. I love getting on here and just absolutely riffing. So Ben and I were like going back and forth for the last couple of days, going, "Are we going to talk about this, or we're going to talk about that?" And then, hell, we've been going for an hour and just basically talking about the industry. So, what do you think we're going to see in 3 or 4 months? How, if you had to, and we're all guessing because who the hell knows, but how do you see this situation affecting the industry 6 months, 12 months from now?
Well, I think, change happens at the margins, right? Like there is no single universal switch that's going to get flipped and everybody's going to go back to work, or everybody's going to just stay home. There's going to be some marginal change. And I think that what you'll see is that this event will pull people in the remote direction. Some percentage of developers and teams that have had to adapt to this reality will embrace it and will stick with it, whether it is entirely or partial, right? It might be a team that just decides, you know what, forget it. We can save on that expensive lease. We're going to just keep doing this from home because this works great. I think that's likely to be true with smaller, more indie teams, for whom that's a less disruptive change. And you'll find some bigger and mid-sized companies may go, you know what, this has its advantages, but it is not ideal. And so we're going to just let people take 1 to 2 days working from home moving forward. And we don't all need to be in the office 5 days a week. And we're going to be more flexible and accommodating for people. And, some percentage of companies and teams will do that. And then there will be the percentage that just goes, look, we have this beautiful, huge office. We really love the synergy that comes out of being in it. It's convenient. We're going to go back to work and nothing's going to change at all from where we were 3 months ago. So, it's going to be a spectrum of changes. But on net, there will be some degree of gravity that pulls some percentage of teams towards more distributed and remote work as a result of this, I think.
Do you think now's a good time to release a game as an indie dev?
Absolutely. I would be, if I was in production on something that had a shot of releasing in the next 2 months, I would be accelerating to try and do that, because I think that demand is going to be higher right now, particularly the further we get into this. The more games that were slated for launch will have launched and people will have played them and will be like, okay, great, I'm looking for something. And
it's like I have zero expectations that we're going to see a PS5 and a Microsoft Series X at Christmas at this point, because I just don't.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that yet, because it's gonna. I think you'll probably see fewer units, because China's probably going to have some disruption of the supply chain as a result of all of this.
They've had a disruption for the last 2 months.
Yeah, but I think that they're starting to get back to work from everything that I've heard, and I think that there's so much incentive now to get these products out there for people who are going to be stuck at home. That you could be right, but I wouldn't say zero chance that we see them.
Yeah, zero chance may be a little extreme, but I think we're going to see. You're not going to have the install base you were expecting. Let's just phrase it like
that. I agree with that. I agree with that. I think that the supply chain is going to be affected at some level.
And so, there are people who were planning to spend money, on big AAA titles, but they're not going to now. And it's like one of the things I'm curious of, and I don't even know, how do these teams that are making Call of Duty, you have hundreds of people, how has this affected the pipeline for those games? I mean, we're talking about companies who sometimes run software to make sure that you're not taking art assets off of their property, and now everyone has to work remote. And so how's it going to affect launch titles? I mean, are we going to see a limited supply of PS5s and like one game? Is it? That's the curious. Usually, I'm the one who tells the indie devs, do not, for any reason, launch in Q4. This year, I'm like, I don't. You got to look and see what's actually going to make it to market. Because I don't know.
I can't. Well, and I'm reluctant to make too bold of predictions about this because I'm not really a marketing person. I'm a production person, right?
It doesn't. We're on the internet. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know.
But you don't have to be. You don't have to be right,
wrong,
man.
I
You
hate
just need
being
to be
wrong.
loud. That's the.
I think that my perspective is that the launch quarter in a new console generation, the volume of sales both on the hardware and software side relative to the volume of sales that's happening on the previous generation is kind of a drop in the bucket. Like I think that there wouldn't, even if nothing had changed, there wouldn't be enough Xbox One X, whatever it's called, and enough
Alpha 6-9er.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the naming over at Microsoft has still got me confused, but no, PS5, that's a pretty straightforward one. Like, I don't think there would be enough PS5s in the market by December to really change the landscape for PC and PS4 dramatically this year. But I'm not enough of an expert on the marketing side to say that with absolute certainty. But I think, the first holidays, you move 1 or 2 million units. You've had a really great launch, or something like that. I don't know that I don't know what the numbers are. It's been 5-6 years or something like that, but that's my feeling on it.
It's this is the beauty of having a podcast and streaming. So you can make bold predictions, and if they're right, you get to go, see, I told you. And then if they're wrong, you're like, why the hell were you listening to me? I do a podcast. What the hell?
Yeah,
I mean, I agree on the indie side.
Speaking of bold, can I go back to bold predictions then for a second?
Because bold predict the shit out of whatever you want.
I boldly predicted just a couple of days ago. I don't know if you saw. I wrote an article that I put out, and my bold prediction is actually that if you want to look for something that's going to have a good holiday season and it's really going to benefit from everything that's going on, I think unambiguously is VR, and I think that VR, both as a potential solution for remote social, whether it's conferencing or social stuff, I think that it really can add value in that department. But the reason I bring it up is because I think that the Half-Life Alyx launch that happened.
I haven't seen any numbers on that yet. That's what I'm Googling while you're talking.
Oh, the numbers are amazing. It's already the highest rated PC game of the year. It's
not rating. I'm talking about how many numbers it sold.
Well, so I'm getting to it. It's already been one of the most highest concurrent user type of games on Steam. It's doing very, very well, and that's completely wildly unsurprising, right? Like anyone who's old enough, like you and me, to understand the context of the Half-Life franchise in the PC gaming universe, I think will be unsurprised by the fact that that's an IP that there's almost nothing else that has the kind of pent up passion as a Half-Life game can expect to have. And so I think that the argument in our article that I wrote is that the people the reason that VR has struggled, I think that the reason that VR has struggled to take off has everything to do with mobile VR. And by that I mean, the kinds of VR that was released as products by Samsung and Google 2-3 years ago that relied on putting a phone into some sort of plastic or cardboard shell in order to use. And those experiences were so unsatisfying as VR experiences that the audience that you would normally expect to be the early adopters of the VR medium, the people who are willing to go drop a few $100s on something, and if it's good, go tell their friends, did that. and they were unimpressed by it. They felt like they kind of wasted their money on Daydream or Google Cardboard or Samsung Gear VR, and so they said, yeah, it's not that interesting. And those were exactly the people that the medium needed in order to go and evangelize VR to the mass market. And those people happen to be hardcore gamers, and it takes an IP like Half-Life coming around for those people to go, okay, wait a minute, I need to give this another try, because if Valve is saying it's worth my time, and if Valve is saying it's worth the Half-Life IP, then I probably need to try it. And what we're seeing is,
Wait, time out. In what world would the company who's making the damn game and the hardware not tell you it's worth your time?
Well, it's a great question. It's a fair question, but Valve, the reason is because Valve has credibility, right? Valve's not going to squander its own reputation and the Half-Life reputation on something that isn't really ready for prime time. And the truth is that it is ready for prime time, and the people who are playing it are being blown away by it, as they should be. And I think that the other thing that's really important to remember is that there is a much more compelling product available now in the Oculus Quest, which is a $400 device that with a small cable can connect to your gaming PC and deliver Half-Life, Alex, and that wasn't available 3 years ago when the medium launched. And I just think you're going to see a lot of hardcore gamers saying, okay, it's time to get into VR now, because there are hardware and software available that makes it really truly compelling.
Counter argument being that the industry and gamers in particular are so thirsty and hungry for Half-Life anything, you could nearly wrap a turd in a box and ship it with a Half-Life thing, and people would still be like, it's
right. But that's not a counter argument. That's in support of this, and it so happens that the turd in the box is a really compelling turd. So
it's
now
a really
it's not
nice turd. And I'm sitting here grinning because I just realized that I already have it in my library and didn't realize it because of circumstances. But
what are you doing here right now?
I don't know. I don't know why the hell I'm still talking to you. It's like I have to get the Vive out and get it like hooked up, which is the bitch. This is my complaint about VR. And my son, he's like, Dad, can we play VR? And I'm like, oh my God, it takes forever to get set up. It's a pain in the ass. It may work or it may not. So it's like I have to set time aside when he's not like, Dad, can we VR? Dad, can we VR? To set it up, because otherwise he's like, oh my God, is it still ready? And I'm like, no, this is going to take a half hour for me to get, set up.
And that's where the Quest, I think, helps again as well. Quest really helps diminish the friction involved with getting into. I'm a big
I agree with you. I mean, I think one of the big winners that's going to come out of this is VR, and I'm already seeing it on the publisher side as well as the developers. I had a team that I love and respect very much come to me several weeks ago before all this stuff went like ape shit, and they're like, "Hey, we've got this game for VR," and I'm like, "All right, so what's your budget?" And he's like, $750,000. So I went, "Nobody is going to pay $750,000 for an indie VR game." And then they started, I mean, this team is also, populated by some of the smartest individuals I know, like Mensa smart people. And he started breaking down all the numbers, and I went, okay, yes, all right, that makes sense. I can understand it now, but we need to do something about that sticker shock, because the publisher's going to look at it and go, no, I'm not paying $750,000 for, a VR game from an unknown studio who hasn't done a VR game before. But I do know we're like way over time, and you have things that you need. You have a call coming up, I believe.
Actually, I don't. I'm happy to hang as long as you want, but if you want to wrap, I've had a great time with this conversation, and I'd be happy to continue or come back anytime you want.
What's your time schedule look like, Andy?
I'm good.
All right, let's keep going.
Let's keep going.
All right, so we got a question that just came in, so Nightwolf's trying to make sure that we don't go anywhere. What about the Switch, Ben? I've read that it's almost sold out fully anywhere. I've read that it is sold out everywhere. So what does this do for Switch games?
I think it helps. I think it's got to be helping. I think the Switch is an amazing platform, and it has. I think it has. I don't know why this would help the Switch more than it would help the PlayStation or the Xbox, but I would expect to see sort of a proportional positive impact on all of the consoles. And Switch included.
Because I think there are more periphery players. I'm going to coin my own little word here. The core gamers, we already have a Switch, we already have an Xbox, we already have a PlayStation. But now you're seeing more and
that's
more.
A great point.
Multiple Switches. Like, we have 2 Switches here.
Yeah.
We have the one that is, on Fortnite a lot, and then we have mine that I bought when I went to the conference in India, because you're not sticking me on 26 hours of flights without something to occupy my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But you're seeing, especially with Animal Crossing as well, like, my wife has put in more hours on the Switch in the last 3 days than she's put on it in the 2 years before this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And so much as the Switch represents the more of the 3 consoles, I would expect the Switch to benefit, because if you're the kind of person who has been sort of sitting on the sidelines of console gaming for some time, and you're like, okay, well, now I have to be at home, I might as well go ahead and get into gaming a little bit more, I think you're going to go for the least expensive and most casual friendly of the consoles, and the Switch probably fits that description. So it probably would benefit even more than Microsoft or Sony do under the circumstances.
So here's the dark side of that coin. There are so many games on the Switch right now. Even if you go on obviously everybody's buying through the Switch store, the eSwitch, whatever they call it. But it's the matter of making yours stand out and pop up to the top. So yeah, it's going to see a gigantic boost in sales, in install base. But it's a matter of, you still got to make sure you're doing what you need to do on the marketing side to make the game visible. That's the problem.
Yeah.
What's next? So we get all geared up to go for like another 10 minutes, and then we run out of stuff.
Animal Crossing. I haven't played it yet. Is it worth the $60?
So here's my complaint. I don't like the fact that you can only have one island per game. And before the game came out, I was like, I don't give a shit. We have, I play it, my wife plays it, my son plays it, and we're all on the same island. The problem from a game design perspective is that because my wife started first, and she's the one that picked the island and named it, and she gets all of the story that goes along. It's like my son and I are kind of like glorified visitors on the island. When
sounds like real life, Jay.
Yeah, I know, it really does. But when Tom Nook and his regime, and you cannot trust a raccoon. I don't know. Is it racist? If is that speciest?
Everybody knows you can't trust a raccoon. You got
a raccoon who owns the airline, all the land, all the infrastructure, including he owns the phone company that you use. You are rewarded by buying things only from him and his kids by reward miles that can only be redeemed for his shit. And by the way, he owns the bank that there's a whole lot of shadiness going on with this Nook regime in the game. But the reality is she gets all the story stuff. And the rest of us just kind of and we can't even contribute. When Tom tells you, yeah, we need more people to come to the island, and you go get more people to come to the island, then he's like, oh yeah, and you have to build their house and make all their furniture. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing, Tom? But
fucking Tom.
Fucking Tom Nook. She, gets the why'd you get a divorce? She took the bad island. But we don't get to see any of that. She just turns around and Julie's like, oh yeah, by the way, we need 4 wooden blocks and 20 iron nuggets.
All right, I have a confession to make. I don't play Animal Crossing. What is it? Why do you like it? What am I missing? Tell me, what is the game of Animal Crossing?
Did you play Stardew Valley?
No.
Oh God, dude, you should. Anyway, it's especially right now.
Is it a city builder? Is it like
no?
Is it Farmville with cute animals? What is the game?
It's a. Did you ever play Harvest Moon?
No, you're seeing a pattern here.
Oh, you're fucking killing me here, Ben.
Yeah.
It's a excellent escape. It's not competitive. You have pretty much free run over in this case an island. In Stardew Valley it's a farm, but it's not like you're constantly racing against a score. And if you decide that you're going to take 3 years to pay off your house and upgrade your house, that's fine. If you want to spend your time fishing or chopping down trees, that's fine. It's very open-ended. Yeah, and somebody said it's a farming and village simulator, and it is, but it's even not the point like what's the big farm simulation game? Maybe it's called Farm. No, not Farmville. The one that has like a damn esports goes along with it, and it might be Farm Simulator. But it's
farming simulator. There is a farming simulator.
Yeah. That one has an actual esports league in Europe, but it's more of it's relaxing. We always talk about games as escapism, and especially right now where people are stressed. It's like, I lost my job, or my job has been basically shut down. We have friends who own a restaurant, and it's like but they can't do anything right now, but they still have rent that their landlord wants them to pay. And it's like, well, tough shit. But you have these, stresses in life that has been made worse in the last couple of months. But games like Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley, they give you a true escape. It's not like I'm escaping to play Doom where I have to, have my reflexes running and I'm totally amped up and you're shooting everything. It really is a relaxing mechanic. I mean, and it's probably the type of game that I could compare most to, you come home from work and you just kind of want to unwind and read a book. It's that sort of experience.
That doesn't appeal to me.
Well, I mean, and honestly, when I first heard of Stardew Valley, I'm like, why the hell would I want to do that? But then I started playing it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. So it is something. And Julie and I played the other Animal Crossings. I never played Harvest Moon, but we played Animal Crossings years ago. We didn't play the 3DS one because we never got 3DSs. But it's something that is just it's almost pure escapism. And there's a reason why GameStop fought tooth and nail to stay open last Friday, declaring themselves an essential business. Even I got a huge laugh out of.
They're not even an essential business in the games industry.
It's the best $60 you can spend. So it's basically, do I want to get $60 in toilet paper, or do I want to get this?
Doug, Indy, wash your ass, okay? This is not, toilet paper is not the end of the world right now.
Oh, I know.
Entire cultures that don't have toilet paper.
I know, and I know a lot of people that have been getting bidets. I've been wanting a bidet for years now, anyways.
See, now you got a chance to get one, but it had the Animal Crossing, at least the British retail numbers have come out, and it was far and away, I want to say like 3x the biggest opening they ever had for an Animal Crossing game. But its day one sales eclipsed the day one sales of every other Animal Crossing game in history combined. And there's a reason.
What when you talk about British game records, it made me think of something that's a bit of a tangent to the Animal Crossing conversation, but something on which I might have a little bit more perspective to contribute, which is you were asking about what a lot of the conversation in this call has been about sort of who we think the winners will be in this, as a result of this whole situation. And that's a little bit insensitive to talk about, considering how tragic the situation is in so many ways. But it's also an inevitable reality that there will be some companies that benefit more than others. What we haven't mentioned, which now that I think about it, I think probably I would be very interested to know what is happening. But I would be unsurprised if sports games are big winners as a result of this, because I think obviously real sports, and whether playing or watching them, is largely not an option as a result of these lockdowns. And the next best thing, and frankly, a very, very compelling and satisfying alternative to both of those things, are sports games, which, like I'm a hardcore FIFA player already, and I could imagine something like FIFA having a huge influx of people who are like, well, this is the only closest thing I can get. It's the only soccer I can find. And whether it's watching people play or playing, that you'll see those games benefiting in particular because the real world alternative shut down.
I'm curious as that too, from the different angle, because there's a reason that Madden launches in August of every year. That's when football season starts.
Sure.
I don't know when soccer season starts, because
soccer was in full swing up until a couple weeks ago.
So for everybody that goes out and buys a copy of the game because it's the only exposure they can get to the sport right now, I would hypothesize there is somebody who doesn't go and get the game because it's not being marketed to them as much. So let's use Madden as the example, because I'm much more familiar with that. I have no problem on FIFA playing last year's version or the year before. I love the game mechanics in FIFA. I enjoy playing it. I don't know who plays for who or what team. I usually end up being the Tottenham Hotspurs, just because of the Jason Sudeikis videos years ago. That's how I pick my Premier League team. But if the NFL doesn't go back on time, why does it matter if you have Madden 21 versus Madden 20? Because you don't really know who's on the teams anyway. What's changed? So,
well, for the people who we're talking about, who are soccer fans who suddenly have no sport to watch, I would say the composition of the teams and the players is going to be a much bigger factor for them than would be for someone like you, who's not really a soccer fan, right? Like, you're a FIFA fan, but you're not really a soccer fan. And for someone like me, who I would say is a pretty hardcore soccer fan, when I got into FIFA, which was relatively recent, it was probably about 2013 or something like that when I started getting into FIFA. I was in the camp of sort of American soccer fans who had played the game my whole life. I really enjoyed the game, the sport, I mean, and I was a fan of our national team, as painful as that is. I watch their games when they play and try to support them.
I always watch it then. I'm that player that watches during the Olympics and during the World Cup.
Yeah, yep. And then you're like, yeah, great. So I like our. I don't really know who anybody else is. What I found was, when my friends started playing FIFA and I got into playing FIFA weekly, with a group of buddies, it was only a matter of months before I had learned all of the players, all the teams, and all the European leagues. And all of a sudden, when we would play, we would do seasons, and we'd play over the course of 4 Monday nights. We would have 6-hour sessions where we would do a tournament. And at the beginning of that tournament, we would draft and transact players off of different teams in order to build teams that were exactly the way we wanted. And we go stats and try and find hidden gems who we thought were the players that we needed, build our own teams, and then play out a season using our own custom versions of teams. And it added a tremendous amount of fun and investment into that experience. But it just comes with time. As you play the game, you just learn the players by osmosis. It's like, well, I just know who they are because I've had to either play against them or whatever. And then guess what happens as a result of that? Now I watch Champions League games on TV of European soccer because I know who all the players are in the real world. right? And I think there are a pretty significant number. I mean, if you look at the rise of soccer in the United States over the course of the last 10 years, which I think has been pretty incredible in terms of the shift in terms of
but that's a
popularity.
low bar to hit. But
it is, but it's totally broken through now, Jay. I mean, like the popularity of the sport is unlike anything it was ever, before when I was, in high school or, and even in the 2000s.
And see,
I think
I have
FIFA
a
has
weird perspective on it because I went to the University of North Carolina and I was there in the late 90s, right after, Mia Hamm graduated, and our women's team basically won every national championship. And then you go to the Olympics and the team is basically the women that I was in college with and that went to UNC. And some women from probably an equal number of women from Notre Dame. And that's our U.S. team for years. That's who it was. And so, I would watch it on that standpoint. And I do, when you do international business for 20 years, I do sit back and go, where in the hell do our kid, my son absolutely loves playing soccer. I mean, he's goalie. He loves it. That's all he wants to do. Spring leagues were coming up, but that's not going to happen right now. But they didn't even have a league here. It was just like clinics. And he goes, I don't care. I want to go do that. And we see that in kids. And then somewhere like around middle school or high school, kids stop giving a shit about soccer in the U.S. And I don't know.
Well, the point is that has always been the case. I mean, even since I was a kid in the 80s, soccer was the most popular youth sport in America. It lends itself to youth sports. It's everybody gets to play. It's very accessible. It makes a lot of sense as a youth sport. It's really fun for that. What would happen would be that as the better players, the better athletes got into high school, in the absence of a pro league and in the absence of the sort of commercial excitement that there is around sports like particularly basketball and football, but to a lesser degree, I think hockey and baseball, our better athletes at the high school level would go and gravitate towards those sports, and they'd start getting passionate about watching those leagues, and they would just lose their interest in soccer. That has changed, right? Like the soccer, MLS is profitable. It's growing. It's got high audience numbers. I think at this point it is a more popular sport by most metrics than either hockey or baseball. And
hockey, I believe, but
I think if you look
in the U.S.,
if you looked at attendance numbers, I think if you looked at a lot of metrics, you'll find that it's very, very competitive, if not ahead of baseball. And it has to do, I think, in no small part with FIFA. Like I know a fairly significant number of people who've gotten into soccer because they played FIFA first as a great game, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, I know this game of soccer now because I've been playing the video game FIFA because it's a great game on its own merits, and now I'm much more interested in the sport. And that goes hand in hand with bringing the Premier League to NBC so people can watch the top tier games every week in the mornings, and a lot of other things that have happened in 10 years. But the sport's huge now. Look at the audiences for the Women's World Cup. For you can go to bars. I mean, I don't know what it's like in North Carolina, but
well, see, it's big.
Bars in LA packed for Champions League games now. Middle of the day.
Well, I'm sure you can find them here. I don't know. I mean, but I got curious and I just Googled this up. So in 2019, average per game attendance, the NFL far and away, they have gigantic stadiums and they only play once a week. MLB was number 2, average attendance of 28,000. MLS was number 3, ahead of, like I said, hockey doesn't surprise me, ahead of the NHL and the NBA. Mm-hmm. How much of that, I mean, you can look at the NHL average and the NBA average, and they're within 400 people of each other. That doesn't factor in popularity. That's all constricted by the size of the stadium. So in terms of popularity, though, that's what I'm trying to, that's what I'm curious about. But I mean, that's what I want to know. It's like when in a world where we're not having these sports on TV, is it a boon for the games, or is it, are we going to end up more people like, I don't need to get this year's, I have last year's, and they haven't really, they haven't really changed
Well,
that much.
I mean, I think that, the idea of purchasing an annualized version of a sports game that's a mature franchise like FIFA and Madden, there have been questions about that in my mind for a long time, right? Really, what I mean, like when the new feature is like realistic blades of grass, you're like, this is a franchise that isn't really bringing a lot to it, and like really what you're talking about is a subscription service, so you're getting roster updates, right?
Yeah.
And I think in a world where there are no real world rosters changing because the sport has been shut down, it does beg the question of what the value of ongoing investment in the game is. But that is hopefully a very temporary situation. And for those people who are real fans, having the up-to-date rosters and more than the rosters, the up-to-date stats, right? Like that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about those protracted leagues that we would play and stuff, was seeing the players in the game continue to have their stats updated in a way that reflected the realities of how they were playing and what their skill levels were, because that created opportunities for us when we were drafting players or creating these teams to say, oh, I think this player is a rising star. I want to grab them and get them on my team and sit on them and watch their stats rise, and then I'll have them, or, make those kinds of decisions.
I was just the opposite, because we used to do the same thing. But I don't want my in-game player stats being affected by their real-world stats. At the beginning of the season, when I'm playing a series like you're talking about, I want my, I don't know what you want to call it, starting stats, the coded stats, the ones that ship with the game. I want them locked day one of when I start the season. And then they change based on how the player plays in the game. If I'm playing and I've got, a forward and whoever, and somebody slide tackles him and he breaks his leg, you've just made my game and my player in the game horrible, and I had absolutely no control over that.
Yeah, but I think that's the nature of it's like fantasy sports at that point, right? It's the same.
But I'm not controlling them. In fact, what's the point of me playing and controlling these players and building them up, natively through the game, if you're just going to oversee that with whatever's happening in the real world? Fantasy, I get. I have no control over it.
The changes tend. I mean, injuries are an interesting one, but the statistical changes tend to happen gradually over time. It's rare that you won't see like a 85 player drop to 75 or something like that. They might drop from 85 to 83, and that can make a difference depending upon which stats have changed and stuff. But it definitely, to me, it adds an element of fantasy football to it, where you're like, or fantasy sports in general, where you're trying to say, look, do I think this player is a wise investment? Because there are factors that can happen outside of my control that can affect that, and that's fantasy sports. So it layers in. It's really a fantasy sports activity with a degree of user, or a higher level of your control over it, right? Like it's like if. And which I've always thought would be really fun, would be to make a fantasy sports Madden game where we do everything is like fantasy, and then we have head-to-head matchups, and we actually play out our head-to-head matchups. But our players.
Isn't that what they do with the card-based thing that you have to buy now?
I hate that.
The Ultimate Team?
I hate Ultimate Team.
Okay. All right. In all seriousness, I do have to go. I do need to call it. And
Animal Crossing's calling your name, isn't it?
No, I'm afraid of what my 8-year-old has eaten and/or done upstairs. While we have. I have no idea. Ben, this was fun.
Yeah, it was great.
And thank you. And we'll do it again.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to share before we leave? If you are a developer or a publisher and you need someone to help come in and oversee your projects, call Ben.
That's what I do.
He's been doing this 20 years. Working remote is not going to affect him unless no one on your team speaks English. Then we discussed this earlier. But aside from that, call Ben.
Thanks very much. This has been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jay. And I'd be happy to come back just to say when. I got nowhere to be, that's for sure.
Exactly. Anything else, Andy?
Yeah, make sure.
Andy, nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, good to meet you. Make sure to click the follow buttons, all that kind of good stuff on if you're watching live right now. And also if you want to listen to the podcast, go to anchor.fm/indiegamebusiness. We got a bunch of different podcasts with a bunch of different information on there. And also our Discord. What's that?
Can I plug one thing? Before we?
No, you already had your time. Go
Yeah, you're done. No, go ahead.
I published a more detailed version of the point I was trying to make about Half-Life Alyx as an article earlier this week. The article is called Half-Life Alyx and the Rebirth of Consumer VR. It's live on GameDaily.biz, which is a really wonderful industry news website run by James Brightman. And, I would encourage you to, if you're at all interested in the details of my argument there, feel free to go check that out.
So it's offline, whatever. Send me the link to it, and we'll make sure it gets put in the comments.
Will do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Also, discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. Join us.
Yes, and the 900 other people that are on it from the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, everyone, enjoy your containment. Thanks so much.
Stay isolated. See ya.